I know some of you will use your calculators, but for right now, I want you to practice this concept just so that you can understand how to do it even if you didn't have your calculator. Okay, so when approximating squares, we're going to find the two perfect squares that the number would fall between. And then we're going to decide which radicand number it is closest to estimate it. So it says estimate the square root of 52 to the nearest integer. Okay, so I'm going to shove this off to the side. Well, no, I'm not. I'll just leave it. So if I were to go through and do this, I know in my red writing there, I'm kind of explaining what I'm verbally going over right now. If I were to think of my perfect squares, which I have written off to the side here, well, 52 would fall between these two numbers right here. So if you're somebody that needs to maybe jot down these perfect squares so you have a really quick reference, that's okay. But remember, perfect squares are your basic multiplication facts where you're taking a number times itself, okay? So when I go through and I see 52 would actually fall in between these two right here. Well, it would fall between 7 and 8. The square root of 52 would fall between the numbers 7 and 8 on the number line. Okay, so now which is that closest to? Because they really want us to estimate it. Well, I can tell you right now, I know some of you have been getting questions like this where they'll say, between what two consecutive numbers does the square root of 52 fall? So understanding here that when you think of your perfect squares, it falls between 7 and 8. Okay, so 52 is closer to the 49, right? It's 3 away from 49. So if this was the square root of 49, these are 3 away from each other. And this was the square root of 64. These are 12 away from each other. Okay, which one is it closest to? Well, it's closest to the 7. So an estimate is the square root of 52 is about 7. Okay, it's a little more than 7, but it's pretty close to 7. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and practice some of these. And like I said, if you need to jot down those perfect squares so you have them to reference back to, you can do that. Right now, you've got them available too. So it says estimate the square root of 85 to the nearest integer. So 85, well, let's see. That would fall between 81, which is the square root of 9. Or sorry, the square root of 81 is 9. So it would fall between 9. And then we would have the square root of 85. And then the next perfect square is the square root of 100, which is 10. So it falls between 9 and 10. Which is it closest to? Well, here we're 4 apart. And here we are 15 apart. So which is it closest to? It's closest to 9. So the square root of 85 is about 9. Okay. Key thing is I'm going to have you guys practicing what two numbers it would fall in between, and then also which number is it closest to. I know the book is going to ask you to go to the nearest 10th. I'm just going to ask that you understand how to get to the nearest integer. If you want to practice going to the nearest 10th, that's okay. And then you can kind of check yourself on your calculators if you need to. Okay, so let's go ahead and try another one of these. Okay, the square root of 190 to the nearest integer. So now, if you look at my perfect squares, I didn't go all the way out to 190. So I'm going to have to extend this out a little bit. I've got all the way out through 12. So if I were to do 13, well, that would be the square root of 169. And 14, I think, is 196. Let me double check myself. Is 196. And then 15 would be, I think, 225. Yep. Okay, and that's far enough for me now. So now, what two numbers would that fall between? Well, 190 would fall between here, the 13 and the 14. So the square root of 169, which is 13. And then we would have the square root of 190. And then we would have the square root of 196, which is 14. So it would fall between the numbers 13 and 14. And it is closest to 14 because here there is only 6 difference, whereas here there's 21 different. So it's closest to 4. So the square root, 14, of 190 is about 14. It's a little under 14, but it's about 14 if we're estimating them. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and have you guys try one of these. Once again, using those perfect squares. Okay, estimate the negative square root to the nearest integer. So anytime they give you that negative, don't worry about that. Remember, all of our square roots are going to give the same number. It's just that we're going to throw a negative in front of them on our final answer. So if we were to find the negative square root of 7, well, let's just think if it was positive, where would it fall? Well, square root of 7 would fall in here, right? So it would fall between the square root of 4, which is 2, and the square root of 9, which is 3. Which is that closest to? Well, it's 2 away from 9 and 3 away from 4. So it's closest to 9. So the square root, negative square root of 7 is about negative 3. Because I have to remember that these are working the negatives since they have this little negative symbol in front. Okay, and you can just add that on into your answer in your final step, but just understanding that it's closest to 3, or it would fall between negative 2 and negative 3 on the number line. Okay, so I want you guys to try this one. Estimate the square root of 33 to the nearest integer. So the square root of 33. Go ahead and pause your video. Find, first of all, what two integers it would fall between, and then identify which one it's closest to. Okay, so it would fall between the numbers 5 and 6, and it is closest to 6, so the square root of 33 is about 6. Okay, because it was 3 spots away from 36 versus, 8 spots away from the 25. So it's closest to 6 here, or it would fall between the numbers 5 and 6. The way that I've been seeing a lot of you guys get them on STAR is it asks you to identify this versus about how much it is. Okay. Remember, on Iowa assessment, when you get to this part, it may be on the part of the test that you can't use a calculator. So make sure that you're